February 24, 2022. Russia launches a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and in northern Poland, construction crews are finishing a canal Russia had been trying to kill for 3 years. Poland is a NATO member, EU member, one of the fastest growing economies in Europe. And for 30 years, it needed Russia's permission to reach its own port. Russia had the legal right to say no, and it used that right. Bans, fees, blocked vessels for decades. Poland just spent $450 million changing that. To understand how a NATO member ended up in this position and why Russia was so desperate to keep it there, you need to look at a map. The Vistula Lagoon stretches roughly 90 kilometers along Poland's northeastern coast, enclosed by a narrow strip of sand called the Vistula Spit. Before the canal opened, its only natural opening to the Baltic Sea sat at the northeastern end in Russian territory at a passage called the Strait of Baltivsk. That strait belongs to Kaliningrad Oblast, a piece of Russia completely detached from the Russian mainland. Kaliningrad is a 15,000 square kilometer exclave wedged between Poland to the south and Lithuania to the north, surrounded on all sides by NATO member states and European Union territory. The territory has a layered history. Before World War II, it was East Prussia, and its capital was Königsberg, founded by the Teutonic Knights in the 13th century. When Germany fell in 1945, the Soviet Union claimed the region at the Potsdam Conference, expelled the German population, and renamed the city Kaliningrad in 1946. After the Soviet collapse, Russia held on to Kaliningrad for one overriding reason. The city of Baltivsk, right on the shore of the strait, is home to the headquarters of Russia's Baltic Fleet, their primary naval presence on the entire Baltic Sea. Kaliningrad hosts one of Russia's most heavily militarized territories in Europe, with anti-ship missile systems, layered air defense networks, and a naval infantry brigade. Every Polish ship sailing to or from Elblag passed through those waters. This dependency has a specific legal dimension that most coverage of the canal skips entirely. After the USSR collapsed, Poland and Russia spent years trying to formalize passage rights. Talks dragged through the 1990s and into the 2000s without a durable agreement. What Poland ended up with was a fragile arrangement requiring Polish ships to notify Russian authorities 14 days in advance, with approval that could be denied at any time. Russia used that leverage. Between 2006 and 2010, Russia imposed a full ban on shipping through the strait, causing direct economic harm to Elblag. After the ban lifted, transit fees and bureaucratic delays continued as soft pressure. Foreign vessels from EU member states were barred entirely. Russia classified those waters as internal. For Elblag, the consequences compounded over decades. Founded in 1237 and a Hanseatic League member since the late 13th century, the city had spent several hundred years as one of the great trading ports of northern Europe. Cargo traffic that reached 358,300 tons in 2014 had fallen to around 125,000 tons by 2021. The city was strangled by geography, slowly, over generations. About 230 kilometers to the east, a strategically critical corridor runs along the Polish-Lithuanian border. At its narrowest point, the corridor is roughly 65 kilometers, about 40 miles wide. NATO strategists call it the Suwalki Gap, described by multiple defense analyses as one of the most dangerous choke points in the entire alliance. Kaliningrad sits to the west. Belarus, functionally integrated into Russia's military planning since 2020, sits to the east. If Russia seized it, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania would lose their only overland connection to the rest of NATO. Just 2 major roads and 1 rail line run through the gap. With the canal open, Polish patrol and logistics vessels can move through the lagoon and into the Baltic without entering Kaliningrad waters. The canal is too shallow for warships. At roughly 5 meters deep, with a vessel draft limit of about 4 meters, no NATO frigate fits through. Russia understood this. Their stated fear of NATO warships using the canal was theatre. The real concern was logical. In a conflict scenario, Poland would operate through its own waters without a Russian hand on the switch. Discussion of a canal across the Vistula Spit goes back decades. The Polish parliament passed a special act authorizing construction in February 2017, with the main formal purpose listed as national security. Work began in 2019 under the Law and Justice government. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. That moment calibrated threat assessments across Eastern Europe and gave the Canal project its political momentum. Party chairman Yaroslav Kaczynski, who had championed the idea since the 1990s, finally had the backing to move forward. The original budget was 880 million Polish zloty. By completion, it had climbed to nearly 2 billion zloty, roughly $450 million. Poland's Supreme Audit Office, the NIK, published a damning report in November 2023, citing serious spending irregularities and unreliable cost estimates from the earliest planning stages. A study from a Polish university concluded it would take approximately 650 years to generate a commercial return. $450 million for a canal about 1.5 kilometers long works out to over $340 million per kilometer, among the most expensive canal construction costs per kilometer in modern European infrastructure history. Poland has large commercial ports at Gdansk, Gdynia, and Szczecin that handle bulk cargo efficiently. The Vistula Canal was never going to compete with them on shipping volume. What Poland was buying was sovereignty as infrastructure, the ability to say no to Russia. The canal as a statement cut in concrete and steel. The Vistula Spit is a narrow coastal sand formation, one of the most challenging coastal construction environments in Northern Europe, exposed to constant wave action from the Baltic on one side and lagoon water on the other. Every element of the engineering had to account for that unstable geology. The contractor consortium, Belgian firm B6 and Polish group NDI, received the contract in October 2019. Engineers drove steel sheet piles deep into the sand on both sides of the excavation route to form retaining walls, then used vibrocompaction, a process that drives high-frequency vibrations into loose sandy soil to compress it until it can bear structural load. Hydraulic excavators pulled out roughly 800,000 cubic meters of material. Crews used that excavated sand and sediment to build an artificial island in the lagoon, creating something new from the material the canal displaced. Two breakwaters shield the canal's Baltic entrance. The eastern one stretches over 1,000 meters, the western over 500 meters. Their cores require 400,000 tons of hydrotechnical stone shipped from Scandinavia. Nearly 10,000 X-block plus concrete blocks were placed along both breakwaters, interlocking elements designed with gaps to scatter wave energy rather than absorb it as a solid mass. The lock is the most sophisticated structure in the entire project and the most misunderstood. Its chamber is 270 meters long, 25 meters wide, and about 6.5 meters deep. 4 steel gates control passage, each one weighing approximately 160 tons. Each gate is built from 6 segments, with each segment composed of 730 individual elements. The heaviest single piece comes in at around 33 tons. The gates slide laterally along rails driven by hydraulic cylinders, sealing the chamber when a vessel enters. A lot of coverage of this canal describes the lock's job as managing different water levels between the sea and the lagoon. That framing misses the primary function. The water levels on either side are roughly comparable. The lock exists to keep Baltic salt water from flowing freely into the Vistula Lagoon, which is primarily a freshwater ecosystem sustained by river runoff. An open connection between the sea and the lagoon would gradually salinate the water, transforming the ecosystem and damaging fisheries and wildlife. The lock keeps the canal functional and keeps the lagoon alive. 2 swing bridges cross the canal, each rotating 90 degrees around a central pivot to let ships through. An automated control system activates each bridge when vessels approach. Road traffic continues between vessel passages, so one lane stays open to cars at all times. All that excavated material became a Secesian island, named by public poll after the ancient Baltic tribe that once inhabited this coastline. The island sits about 2 kilometers from the canal in the Vistula Lagoon, covering around 180 hectares. Russia had used environmental concern as one of its main arguments against the canal, claiming construction would devastate local bird and fish populations. Hydrological studies found the canal would produce minimal change to the lagoon's water balance. The island became a nesting ground for coastal birds, generating habitat rather than destroying it. By 2021, the canal's Baltic Sea entrance was taking shape. The breakwaters were rising from the water, the lock chamber was being sealed into place, and construction was past the point of no return. And that is when Russia moved. Not with military force, with paperwork. Russia ran a three-part campaign against the canal, each argument aimed at a different audience. The environmental argument was aimed at EU institutions. Russian state media and officials published reports claiming the canal would drive local species toward extinction. Moscow announced plans to build a national park on the Russian segment of the Vistula Spit, a burst of ecological concern that had been entirely absent for decades. The goal was to trigger EU-level environmental reviews capable of delaying or killing the project through bureaucratic procedure. The economic argument was aimed at Polish domestic opinion. Russian commentators amplified the 650-year ROI figure and pushed the narrative that the canal was financially irresponsible. On the commercial numbers alone, this argument had real merit. Poland's major ports were elsewhere, and the canal was too shallow for large cargo vessels. The military argument was aimed at international audiences. Russia formally claimed the canal would give NATO warships access to the Vistula Lagoon, threatening Kaliningrad's security. Their military threat argument had already been answered by a depth chart. Poland's response was consistent throughout. They labelled the canal civilian infrastructure, pushed the project through EU environmental review, and never publicly engaged the military framing. They built it anyway. The canal opened on September 17, 2022. The maritime office in Gdynia's workboat Zodiac II went through first. The following day, 95 ships made the transit. The date carried the full weight of Polish history. On September 17, 1939, the Soviet Red Army crossed Poland's eastern border, while Nazi Germany was already advancing from the west. The country calls it one of the darkest days in its existence, a coordinated double betrayal that led to occupation lasting 5 decades. Poland chose the anniversary of that invasion to open a waterway that cut Russia out of its coastline forever. Prime Minister Morawiecki called it breaking the last symbolic ties of dependence. Less than a year before the opening, on February 24, 2022, Russia had launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Construction had begun years before most European governments believed a major Russian land war was possible. By September 2022, the strategic reasoning behind every zloty spent had been confirmed in the most brutal way imaginable. Poland read the situation correctly and acted while the window was open. The commercial case for the canal remains weak. Around 12 medium ships can transit per day. The canal depth limits what it can serve. By any traditional shipping metric, the investment cannot justify itself for generations. But infrastructure spending carries purposes beyond commercial return. Rural rail lines run at a loss to keep communities connected. Military installations cost billions to deter threats that may never materialize. The Vistula Canal did something that 30 years of diplomacy could not. It made Russian permission structurally unnecessary. For Elblag, the change is already visible. Tourism facilities have expanded. Logistic companies have announced plans to use the port for yacht and small vessel services. For residents who watch the port district slowly empty for decades, it's the first visible sign that the geography has changed. The dredging of the final 900-metre stretch of the Elblag River is expected to wrap up by mid-2026, finally allowing the commercial vessels the waterway was designed for to reach the port. The ROI calculation has no line for what Russia could have extracted from Poland during a war in their backyard, with the only exit to Elblag sitting in Russian hands. Poland spent $450 million on a canal that cannot generate a commercial profit for 6.5 centuries. Russia spent years trying to kill it, and Poland opened it on the anniversary of the day Russia invaded them. Was this the smartest $450 million Poland ever spent? Or the most expensive kilometre in European history? Drop your answer in the comments. Subscribe for more Megabuild stories.